Welcome to Expert Insights for Workplaces. Today's topic is loneliness at work, combating an epidemic. We'll be looking at shift patterns, remote workers, and preventing isolation through psychosocial safety. We know that in an era of flexible work schedules, remote jobs, and digital-first communication, workers are at risk of loneliness and isolation, a really common psychosocial hazard. But is this just a side effect of modern work, or can organizations be doing more to support their people and benefit the business? Black Dog Institute acknowledges the Bidjigal clan of the Dharawal Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which Black Dog Institute is situated. The work that we do at Black Dog Institute stretches far across this land, and we acknowledge and pay respect to all First Nations peoples and communities and their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. We recognise that their customs and cultures have nurtured this land since the first witness sunrise for the benefit of all who live and learn on country today. We pay respect to elders past, present, and across time from all nations across this country. We recognise that through lived experiences and the ongoing commitment to caring for collective social and emotional wellbeing, First Nations peoples and communities have helped guide the research and resources at Black Dog Institute. Welcome, I'm Caroline McLaren. I'm the Workplace Engagement Manager here at Black Dog Institute. And today we've got joining us Andrew Arena, postdoctoral research fellow at the Black Dog Institute, who specialises in workplace mental health. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And we've also got Melissa Weller, Director of Industry Relations and Program Management at Healthy Heads in Trucks and Sheds. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So, Andrew, we're going to start with you. The focus of today's webinar is on loneliness. Isolation is recognised as a psychosocial hazard. Can you explain what that means and why loneliness is a challenge for both workers and workplaces?
Yeah, for sure. So a psychosocial hazard, that term is being increasingly used within workplaces. It's a well-known term within research. All it means is that it's a common factor in the workplace that negatively impacts our mental health. So we're all familiar with physical hazards as a physical condition that negatively impacts our physical safety. In the same way, a psychosocial hazard is something that's negatively impacting our psychological safety. So you can see on the slide here some key examples of common psychosocial hazards. So things like high job demands or unattainable job demands, increased risk of mental health issues, having low control over how we do our job, poor support from our managers or colleagues, and there's a whole range of potential hazards here that might exist in a workplace. And then highlighted there is remote or isolated work. So that is now quite well recognized as a psychosocial hazard. And before I dig into why, firstly, just teasing apart isolation versus loneliness. Isolation is the actual condition of being isolated at your work. So being separated from other people. It can have more or less positive or negative impacts on different people. Loneliness is the actual emotional outcome of the isolation, and that's the distress that comes from feeling disconnected. Now, isolation is labeled as a social hazard because it has known negative impacts on mental health and well-being overall. So it's known to increase things like depression, anxiety, and also suicidality. Also, what's particularly, I guess, impactful about isolation is it also reduces social support. So if you're starting to feel mentally unwell and you're isolated, then you also have less capacity to reach out and get the support you need, which can lead to this cycle of negative mental health. And I guess what we know as well about loneliness in the workplace specifically is that it does have a negative impact on a range of work outcomes. So it's known to increase burnout. So that's when you become emotionally exhausted by your work, detached and cynical, and feeling ineffective in your job. It also has negative impacts on your productivity, how engaged you are, number of sick days you take, and your intentions to leave your job as well. There's also job satisfaction, and what's interesting as well is if you're feeling isolated or lonely at work, then you also tend to feel less committed to your organization. And so collectively, we can see why loneliness is really important for an individual's mental health, but also why it's important for a business as well and for teams. If employees are feeling lonely, then they're not going to be able to do their best work. It's not going to allow teams to thrive or businesses to thrive as well as they could. So there definitely is this dual impact on individuals and also teams and businesses.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about that vicious cycle of loneliness perpetuating that social isolating, which we know is such an important protective factor for mental well-being. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, exactly.
And Melissa, in your role at Healthy Heads and Trucks and Sheds, you work closely with organisations in transport, postal and warehousing, a sector where the evidence shows that loneliness can be quite common. What types of roles are usually most affected, and what impacts are you hearing from workplaces?
We find that a lot of the frontline roles across the industry are more affected by loneliness, and probably one of the most obvious ones is the line haul truck drivers. They can be on the road in a truck on their own for many, many days in a row, living out of their trucks, away from family, that sort of thing as well. But also delivery drivers, and we've got an increasing number of delivery drivers across many types of logistics services, and they might be on the road on their own in a car, in traffic, in a van, loading and unloading, delivering groceries, all sorts of packages, but they're alone doing that throughout the day, and they may not check in to a warehouse again till the end of their shift. Driving a forklift is a pretty solitary task as well, and things like picking and packing, where you are pretty much working on your own for fairly long hours at times in really repetitive tasks as well. And a lot of the industry works on shift work, and this can also not only limit your ability if shifts are changed regularly to develop relationships with other workers, but also can limit people's opportunities to connect with their friends and family outside of work as well. So increasing automation is one of the issues that's been raised across the industry. Automation and self-service systems mean there's less human-to-human contact in a number of different processes across the industry. So that's really affecting people in various roles as well. And it's a really busy, fast-paced, 24/7 type of industry environment that everyone's working in also. So finding opportunities where you can actually bring teams together, or even just pause for long enough to really genuinely connect and put things in place that bring people together, can be really challenging as well.
Yeah, it sure can. There's so many roles there where it seems like people are interacting with the public, but actually the majority of their day is socially isolated. So it's understandable that that loneliness can result. Before we move on to the next question, we do have some time at the end to answer questions from the audience. So by all means, feel free to use the question and answer function within Zoom to pop any questions. As Andrew and Melissa are talking, you might think of something that you'd love to explore more. So feel free to pop that in there. Andrew, so Melissa's mentioned a few roles specifically within the transport and postal sectors, but how do you see loneliness showing up in different types of workplaces? So that might be shift-based, but also hybrid, remote, or office-based environments. And what role do you see job design playing in preventing isolation?
So there are certainly some industries or some roles where the isolation and the loneliness is really prominent and really clear cut. But it's also important to remember that isolation can emerge across a range of different roles. So one end of the spectrum, you may be working in an office, but still experience isolation or loneliness. So loneliness can emerge due to poor quality of relationships. So you might be in an office where there are many people, but your relationships are strained. Or when you think about it, if there is no one around who you can speak your mind to, who you feel comfortable talking to about serious issues, then you might be prone to feeling lonely in that situation. Now, of course, isolation can also emerge when we're isolated from our work colleagues. So say we even have good relationships with them, things like working from home or working remotely can mean that we have little interaction. And that can, of course, increase our isolation and loneliness. And then right at the other end of the spectrum, we have those jobs that are causing isolation from both colleagues and friends and family. Say when you're required to be isolated, say on the road for really extended periods of time, or fly in, fly out workers, there are some types of roles that mean it can be harder to stay connected with all of our people we have relationships with. Now, so isolation can affect a range of different roles, and job design is one important thing that we should be considering when we're trying to prevent isolation. And so when we're talking about job design, we're talking about how jobs are planned, how they're structured, how we allocate work to people, and how it's done. So workplaces do have a bit of control over this. And so I think each workplace needs to consider what's feasible for them, as roles are going to be so different, and each situation requires us to think about the context. And in some situations, it may be harder than in others to address. But we're talking about strategies like better integrating avenues for effective communication, factoring in communication into our workflows and daily schedules, and leveraging technology to help us do that, whether it's by phone or virtual meetings. There are a lot of ways that workers can remain connected, and how you deliver work tasks, etc., can be done in a way that feels more connected than isolating. But there's a lot of different examples that we could go into, but I might leave it there for now.
Thanks, Andrew. That's good. A good couple of tasters there. Andrew, we've heard that loneliness can impact workers negatively, and in recent years, we've heard terms like the loneliness epidemic used in media. Are we genuinely seeing more loneliness in workplaces today, or are we simply more aware of its impacts?
It's a really good question, but answering those types of questions is always going to be difficult. It's always hard to tease apart what's a genuine increase and what's an increase in people being aware of it and therefore reporting it more. But with some of the stats that we are seeing, I guess research is increasing a lot in this space. And so we are starting to understand it better. So you mentioned the term epidemic, and I have seen that myself. People are referring to a loneliness epidemic. And so when I see a strong term like that, I'm always immediately skeptical. But then when we look at the stats, we can see why people are using that term. So from some prominent Australian data, it's been reported that about 1 in 6 Australian adults will report feeling lonely at any given time. So 1 in 6 is quite a lot of people when you think about in terms of, say, your office or your colleagues. 1 in 6 people are likely to be feeling lonely. And a lot of the data that we see does center around young people. And a lot of the data that people are talking about still refers to that COVID type era and the tail end of COVID. So young people were hit really hard around that time. And so we do see some stats around 2 in 5 young people feeling lonely. And when you think about that, that's almost half of young people. So the term epidemic may not be as exaggerated as I initially may have thought. Now, going back to the question, you were asking whether there's been an increase in loneliness over time. So particularly for young people, there is some evidence that loneliness has been increasing even before COVID. So over the last 10 years since about the global financial crisis. And then the post-COVID data is still sort of emerging. One thing we are confident in as well is that the shift to more remote work after the pandemic has increased loneliness among workers. So remote work does increase loneliness, which, like I said before, you can have a range of negative flow-on effects. Now, at this point, I do also want to mention, we've talked a lot about the negative side, that the negative impacts that the workplace can have on us. But the workplace does also often play a positive role for mental health. So it can be quite common that the workplace is a key source of socialization for people. Sometimes people who feel lonely outside of work can get that from their workplace. Also, in terms of remote work, it may increase loneliness, but there are also some benefits of working from home or remote work. And so whether on the whole it negatively impacts people's mental health is going to depend on the person and what else is happening in their context. So the short story of all that is that it is a complicated situation, but overall, I do think that work in today's world is increasing the risk of loneliness for sure.
That's really interesting, Andrew, to think that in a modern era where we're technically always connected, that it's actually possible to feel even more disconnected. And so we're seeing in the chat some really great suggestions about how people in the transport, postal, warehousing sector are managing to stay connected. We're seeing people talk about calling colleagues hands-free or executives providing recorded updates so that people can actually listen in and feel connected whilst driving. I'm curious, Melissa, from your conversations with organizations in the transport sector, can you share any other examples of how organizations are creating that opportunity for workers to feel that bit more connected?
There's certainly some great examples of organisations putting the effort in to really bring teams together and doing that at a time where perhaps you can cross 2 shifts over, deliberately creating opportunities to bring people together and helping remote teams to build connections. So this in turn sort of encourages that stronger peer-to-peer relationship. So you start to get a more organic check-in sort of system going where people do say, oh, I didn't see you on shift this week, how are you going? Or I know you're out in the truck all day, what's your day been like? And you start to hear that once you have this sort of sense of community created in the organisation, in the business, people tend to sort of look after each other a little bit better and check in with each other. And I think also bringing people together for something as simple as a barbecue or a morning tea really helps people not only connect with each other but feel valued as well and feel that they have a connection to the organisation and that they're valued as an employee as well. So some of those really simple things like lunch or food, or also things like toolbox talks, bringing everyone together to really reinforce the importance of speaking up or reaching out if you are feeling isolated or you're feeling sad, you're feeling disconnected, or if you provide that clear guidance on who to contact or how to reach out or what all the options are for gaining some support, then people are more likely to take those up. So we have, for example, the Healthy Heads app that has a list of organisations that people can reach out to. In a toolbox talk, you can also remind people that to talk to your supervisor if issues are raised, or through different types of mental health awareness, you can really remind people to look at the signs and signals in others. What sorts of things are they saying to you when you're talking to them on a shift or at the end of a shift and that sort of thing? How do we pick up that somebody might be either feeling isolated or their behaviour is showing us that they're not connecting? And being really aware of those sorts of things all comes through that continued conversation in workplaces around the importance of mental health and connection. It's a challenging industry to stay connected, particularly in some roles, and planned phone calls, regular check-ins scheduled into the roles that people are in. Those sorts of things are really important to take the time to design into the roles. And I think Andrew was talking about good job design. There was a really good example at a warehouse that I was made aware of where delay times can cause a lot of stress for drivers. So you arrive at a distribution centre and all of a sudden you're having to wait because there's delays for you to unload or reload. And this can cause a lot of stress. And the delays can be hours. And they created welcomers for the drivers. And that was really important because it meant that there was someone there that could approach the drivers, particularly in times of high delay, and sort of say to them, I'm sorry for the delay. This is approximately what you're looking at. Or even just, how's your day going, as they arrive at a distribution centre. And they were getting some amazing results from that. What it was doing, it was lowering some of the sort of the workplace aggression that could be generated through those types of delays, and then people really feeling disconnected. What's going on at the warehouse? How long am I going to be sitting here? All of those sorts of things. So really increasing that communication, but again, making people feel really valued as a driver. Your time is important, and we are making an apology for the delay that you're experiencing. So some good examples there.
Thanks, Melissa. I really love with those examples how they're really taking on that employee perspective and how we can really improve this employee experience. And so we'll head back to Andrew. From an evidence-based perspective, what are small everyday behaviours from leaders or teammates that could make a big impact?
Well, firstly, I would say that I love Melissa's examples. There are a lot of really great ones there that absolutely align with I would suggest as well. And so firstly, I'll speak to what has been put up on the screen here. So in terms of an evidence-based perspective, here is an evidence-based framework for creating mentally healthy workplaces that was developed at Black Dog Institute. So it can initially be a lot to look at, and we will be sharing this around afterward. But to break it down, there are 3 broad sort of levels at which we can intervene to help people with their mental health. So the first level is this protect level. So this is prevention, where we're protecting people from negative mental health. Now, if people do develop mental ill health, then there's the respond level. Then we need to look at how do we respond effectively for these people. And then there is also the promote level. So this is promoting positive mental health and well-being initiatives and things like that. So within each of these broad levels, there are also the different levels within the organization that we can act at as well. So this goes from the individual level. So this is something that an individual worker can do. The job level, which is looking at what's inherently involved in the job and how is the work designed. Operations and team level. So this is looking at team dynamics and the social and physical environment. So I guess things that managers can do often fits within that level. And then at the highest level, there are systems and policies we can be working on. So I guess that gives a broad sort of sense of all the different ways that we can try to act. But then for some specific sort of pointers, the first thing I like to mention is workplace culture. And I think that culture is something that everyone in a workplace is responsible for to a degree. We all contribute to workplace culture, and we should all be thinking broadly about how we can contribute to a workplace culture where connection is the norm, where support is always available, and that it becomes, this is just how we operate, this is just how we work. So Melissa gave some great examples of when checking in becomes the norm, then workers are more likely to just do that naturally and support each other and identify when someone might need support. And so to shift workplace culture, I do think that managers and leaders need to be leading by example. I think that managers and leaders need to be modeling what it means to have healthy work-life boundaries, to model good connection, model supportive relationships. And so that's always going to be important. So again, like Melissa said, I think we need to make that checking in with each other just standard practice and looking at how we can make that as meaningful as possible. So going beyond just a quick, have a good weekend and move on to work stuff. You're just really engaging on a personal level. How have you been coping with work? How are things with the family? Sort of trying to actually ask questions that are engaging with your person on a more intimate level, I guess. And again, like Melissa mentioned, I think that acknowledging when things are challenging is important. If something's happening that is challenging for workers, just raising it and be like, I know this might be a hard time or a hard situation, giving information, and just that's a key point to connect things. So just keeping that in mind. So another thing, I guess, at that team level, if people are working remotely, it's about making, I guess, trying to substitute what you would naturally get in the office. So if that's creating a standing 5-minute meeting, even, or half an hour meeting, even if there's not much business to discuss, still have that meeting and you still just connect, even if it's only briefly. I think that can just, a little bit can go a long way to helping remote workers feel, okay, I'm seen, I'm acknowledged, I'm valued, like Melissa said. And then it's always going to be important to be aware of the signs of mental health symptoms, signs that someone might be struggling. So building confidence around being able to identify that and have conversations when you feel like something's going on is important. And that's important for managers, true. And it's also important for coworkers and just individuals. If we can all be aware of these things and we're all supporting each other, and that's going to help create that culture I'm talking about. Again, that ties into having regular check-ins. If you are regularly checking in with your coworkers or your employees, you're going to be able to notice when something's changed in their mood or their behavior. And that really acts as the springboard for having a private and respectful conversation. Be like, hey, I've noticed you might not be as engaged as you used to be. You might not be as XYZ as I normally see you. Is everything okay? How are you doing? And I guess lastly, I should just mention job design again. I guess one thing we can do is look at work schedules. And so making sure that there is allocated time to reset and to have that social interaction. Or looking at shift structures to ensure that people are getting enough time with friends and family outside of work. So those are just a few pointers, I guess, but there's a lot more we could go into with all those things.
Beautiful, Andrew. Thank you. One of the questions that's come through for us is around advocating for ourselves and what we can do if we are experiencing some of the psychosocial effects that were mentioned earlier. I know you've touched on there already about how we're each responsible for culture and personally checking in and noticing changes in our colleagues. Is there anything else you would say to someone curious about how they can better advocate for themselves when they are experiencing these psychosocial effects that we've named today?
Yeah, I think that it would be great if I could just suggest go to your manager, have that conversation. But I know that not everyone has that relationship with their manager. So maybe something that can help build that confidence is by talking with colleagues. Hey, are you feeling this as well? And then that can help give you that. I think that this is important and something to raise. Something I think that is always good to do as well is you can always ask about what's available through your work. What supports are available, what's on offer. And often there's an employment assistance program or something like that, which can be a great starting point if you're feeling like you need support. And then, of course, there are a range of organizations doing great things like Healthy Heads in Trucks and Sheds. Yeah, so there's a lot of ways, I guess, to sort of start speaking up about what you're feeling. But maybe a first point of call is to, I guess, speak to the people around, co-workers and stuff, and then see if you all agree that there's something that needs to be taken higher.
That's great advice, Andrew. Thank you. And then a question for both of you. We'll start with you, Melissa. With workplaces changing rapidly, particularly with AI, automation, and hybrid work models, what do you think workplaces will need to pay attention to prevent isolation and loneliness?
I think certainly in transport and logistics is being very conscious of maintaining that human connection in all roles, regardless of how remotely someone works, is absolutely essential. And we have mentioned those planned check-ins, whether it's by phone call or video call, or simply approaching people sort of during a shift, or that sort of thing is really important. And structuring those roles and work environments to support interaction as well. So you starts and finishes of shifts, but also creating a work environment that also encourages people to connect with each other. So the physical environment, I think, in this conversation is really important as well. And I'll give more a warehouse and distribution centre type of example this time, but looking at what breakout or shared spaces are there that actually encourage people to mix, to sit down and eat together when they do have a break, to engage socially. And I've seen some great examples of adding some more fun elements like having a ping pong table or an air hockey table or a foosball table or even an outdoor basketball hoop, and really give people an opportunity to mix. And maybe smaller spaces. I've seen packets of Uno cards put on tables in tea rooms and things, and you see people sort of playing these games. And a fantastic example that went across a number of shifts was one table set up with a jigsaw puzzle. So regardless of what shift you're on, you could come over and you could add a few pieces to the jigsaw puzzle. And as a team saw the jigsaw puzzle growing, not even knowing necessarily who's put the pieces in place. But what that did was create conversation on the floor as well from time to time around the jigsaw puzzle and that sort of thing. So it's not sort of brain surgery, is it? It's how do we encourage people to interact with each other when they do have time to do so, or how do we bring everybody together as a bit of a community? And game playing's always been really important in that light-hearted way, I think can be a great thing. But one thing I'll say with that also is making sure that in a transport and logistics context, to make sure that those coming and going from a distribution centre or warehouse also have access to those break spaces as well. So not just the teams that are on site every day, but those coming and going need to have spaces that put them in an environment where they do get to have a conversation with someone, whether they're refilling a water bottle, using a bathroom, to get that human interaction while they're in that area is really important.
Brilliant. Those are some great suggestions. I love the idea about bringing people together over food and through play. Those seem to be some really great cornerstones to come back to. And Andrew, how about you? What do you think workplaces need to pay attention to?
Much the same. I think Melissa said a lot of what I would have said myself. And like you said, with fun and food and things like that, for instance, that's a key thing that the Black Dog Institute tries to, or is quite successful at doing, I think. There's a lot of emphasis around bringing people together around some sort of something fun or some food or something like that. Finding opportunities to actually connect and build community. Once there's a sense of community, it really does go a long way to addressing a lot of things. But what I was going to say as well is, Melissa said, finding ways to maintain that human to human contact is going to be important, because without this, how will anyone know if someone is struggling? How can we identify mental health struggles if there is no contact or connection? And the issue is, if mental health struggles go under the radar, they're more likely to become severe, and that's when they start interfering with life and with work. So creating opportunities where we can have conversations and having a conversation about mental health early can prevent so many negative consequences down the track. So like I've said before, I guess a connected workplace is a healthy workplace. I also just want to flag, that there are a lot of great suggestions in the chat, and some people have put forward a lot of great things. And I think at one point there was something about employers endorsing, say, EAP programs, and I would second that and say manager support is so critical. We need leaders to be stepping up to the plate and really modeling what we want to see for our workplace culture.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, something else I've noticed in the chat coming through is some themes around isolation related to gender or age. So people being in a female-dominated workplace and feeling isolated, and I presume potentially it might go the other way in transport, postal. And then we've also seen some themes coming through around intergenerational differences, younger people feeling like they can't get older people to open up, and older people feeling like their experience isn't being respected. I was wondering if either of you have any guiding wisdom or thoughts on this sense of isolation that comes through, I guess, demographic details about ourselves, whether that is age, sex, ethnicity, background.
I might sort of say a little bit. So I think this again brings back why it's hard to give broad overarching suggestions for what all workplaces should do, because each context is really going to require different things. And so that's why it's been great to hear some of the specific suggestions that Melissa was giving. In my own team here at Black Dog Institute, we work a lot around contexts that are male dominated. So workplaces that are male dominated tend to have masculine cultural norms that really discourage help seeking. And so, for instance, that's something that is really critical to take into consideration. Suggestions for what's going to work in that context is not going to be the same as what you would suggest for primary school teachers or something like that. So it is a complicated issue, and that's why it's hard to give really guaranteed steps that everyone can always take. You always need to be thinking about, who are you trying to help?
Yeah, beautiful. And another question that's coming through is, and a theme throughout the chat has been essentially this tension between wanting to offer opportunities for connection, but also recognizing that people might have different communication styles, sensory needs, boundaries, perform better through working from home. How do we navigate that and acknowledging the diversity of our workforces?
I think it's offering a number of different approaches if your workforce is quite diverse with regard to having some people working from home. And as far as transport and logistics specific, most of the time people are at work. There may be leadership or scheduling or some supervisory roles that may have a work from home or a component or an online component. But I think it's offering a variety of different sort of forums, approaches, so that you are offering that sort of diversity.
Wonderful.
Second that, I would say that you need to maintain some degree of flexibility, that there is very rarely a one-size-fits-all sort of solution. There always needs to be considerations. And that's where things like having a clear diversity and inclusion policy or strategy, or something we've been developing at Black Dog Institute, is a diversity and inclusion checklist for workplace events, just to make sure that the needs of different types of people are going to be considered, and that there are options or considerations when you're trying to implement something.
Beautiful. We might leave on this last question. Do we know if people struggling with loneliness and isolation actually recognize it as that, or would their lived experience of it be something more akin to boredom or something else? What do you think, Andrew?
I definitely think that it can be misunderstood by the person who's experiencing it. And because a lot of my research lately has focused around male-dominated situations, it is often the case there, for instance, that it takes someone else to point out to the person that they may be struggling for them to actually realize it. And so I think that the awareness of these things might take some time to catch up. And unfortunately, sometimes it's not until things get to that critical point that you're really severely struggling that you start to wake up and think something needs to change. And so by having these types of conversations, we're hoping to bring that awareness earlier in the process so that if something's not feeling right, then you are able to say, maybe it's the isolation, maybe it's this or that might be impacting me.
There's nothing like being able to name something that's troubling you. It can take the weight out of it, can't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you both for such a wonderful discussion today. I've found it immensely interesting, and I can tell from the chat people have had a really good conversation here today. We would really appreciate you taking a moment to share your feedback about today's webinar. We read through all the feedback and use it as a way to improve and change how we offer webinars. So please feel free to take the time to share. You can either scan the QR code that's currently on your screen, or in a moment when you exit Zoom, you'll have the survey pop up for you as well. We also want to say a big thank you to Healthy Heads in Trucks and Sheds for all the work they do and for coming along today. Melissa, did you want to share a little bit more about what is available on the website?
Yeah, sure. We'd love you all to go and explore our website. There's all sorts of resources and information there that can be shared with everyone from frontline roles across to sort of leadership. Importantly, with the discussion on psychosocial safety today, we have got a tool there that can help put a workplace wellbeing plan into place that we developed with our consulting psychologists. And so amazing tools there to help you structure an approach to people to keeping people psychologically safe in the workplace as well. So
Healthy Heads are doing some great work, and we're also offering some workshops through them as well. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you all for your time today. We really appreciate you joining. Take care.